Hey there, deep divers. So today we're diving into a question that's about as old as humanity itself, I guess you could say. What makes us,
Hmm.
us? What is it that sets humans apart from all the other species out there? And how in the world did we end up building these incredible, complex civilizations? We're going deep into Leslie Valiant's book, The Importance of Being Educable, to explore this mind-blowing idea, this concept of educability.
It's funny, when you really start to think about it, we always hear about the same old things, right? Language, tool use, our big
It's the
brains,
usual suspects.
right? All those things that supposedly make humans special. But Valiant makes a really interesting point, which is that none of those things alone seems to fully explain the whole skyscraper building, symphony writing thing.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, chimpanzees have pretty impressive cognitive abilities.
Yeah.
They use tools, they communicate, but you don't see them, designing iPhones.
Exactly. So if it's not just those things, then what is it? Valiant says it's something much deeper, something he calls educability.
Okay, so educability. But isn't that just a fancy word for learning? I mean, we all learn things, right?
Right, but it's not just learning in the way that we typically think about it. It's not just about memorizing facts or picking up a new skill like learning to ride a bike. It's this incredible ability we have to absorb entire systems of belief.
Systems of belief. Okay.
Yeah, and we're talking about beliefs from all kinds of sources, our own experiences, what other people teach us, and then here's the kicker. We apply those beliefs to situations we've never encountered before.
So you're saying it's like we're constantly downloading these mental programs, these belief systems, and then using them to navigate the world, even when it throws us a curveball.
Exactly. And those belief systems can be incredibly complex, from something like, a scientific theory about how gravity works to a cultural norm about, say, how we greet each other to, heck, even something like a superstition. We're swimming in a sea of beliefs, and they shape how we understand and interact with the world around us.
And that's what Valiant says gives us that extra oomph, that civilization enabler, he calls it. It's this specific kind of learning, this educability, that really sets us on the path toward building those complex societies.
That's right. He's saying it's the secret sauce, the thing that really sets humans apart.
But here's what I find interesting. If we look at the genetic evidence, the fossil record, there isn't this big, obvious change that lines up perfectly with those big jumps forward in civilization building. It's almost like, genetically speaking, we were ready for civilization long before we actually built it.
It's true, and it really challenges this idea that, we just sort of suddenly became intelligent and boom, civilization. It suggests that maybe we didn't just suddenly become intelligent. It's more like we inherited this incredible capacity for learning, this educability, and it slowly blossomed over millennia.
So instead of one giant leap, it was more like a million tiny steps, each one making us a little bit better at learning itself.
Right. And what's really fascinating is that this capacity for educability seems to be present even in groups that have been relatively isolated for like tens of thousands of years. Valiant uses the example of the Sand people in southern Africa.
Right, the sand people.
Yeah, they might have been genetically isolated for, well, a very long time, yet they still have this capacity for intricate culture and learning.
Okay, so if it's not some huge genetic leap, then what's going on? How does Valiant explain this whole educability thing?
Well, he breaks it down into three core pillars. Think of them as the fundamental building blocks of educability.
Okay, I love a good framework. Lay it on me. What's the first pillar?
The first one is what Valiant calls learning from examples, which is honestly pretty fundamental stuff. We see this kind of learning across species, not just in humans. It's like when a pigeon, say, learns to recognize a tree in a picture, they're taking specific examples and extracting a broader concept from them.
Right, they're like, okay, I'm seeing a pattern here. These tall, leafy things, those must be trees.
Exactly. They're generalizing from specific instances to broader concepts.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what's the next pillar? What do we humans do that takes this learning game to a whole new level?
So the second pillar of educability is all about combining that learned knowledge. We're not just collecting isolated facts, we're connecting them, building these elaborate mental webs of understanding.
Right, because knowing that a tree is one thing, but understanding how trees fit into the whole ecosystem, how they interact with sunlight and soil and, squirrels, that's a whole other ballgame.
Exactly. And this is where things start to get really interesting, because it's this ability to combine knowledge that allows us to do things like, say, build a shelter or, I don't know, bake a cake.
Okay, baking a cake. Now you're speaking my language.
Yeah.
So walk me through it. How does educability turn someone into a star baker?
Well, think about all the different pieces of knowledge involved in baking a cake. You need to understand ingredients, right? Like what's flour, what's sugar, how do they behave differently?
Okay, so that's learning from examples like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
I've seen enough cakes in my life to know one when I see it or eat it.
Right. But then you need to understand how those ingredients interact with each other. What happens when you mix flour and sugar together? What does adding eggs do to the batter?
Okay, so that's where the combining knowledge part comes in.
Exactly. And it's not just about knowing the individual facts, it's about understanding the relationships between them. It's about being able to take those individual pieces of knowledge and put them together in new and interesting ways.
So it's like, instead of just memorizing a recipe, you're understanding the underlying principles of baking, the chemistry, and the physics of it all, so you can improvise, experiment, maybe even come up with your own signature cake recipe.
Exactly. And that's a great example of how combining knowledge allows us to go beyond just mimicking what we've seen before. We can start to innovate, to create something entirely new. And this is something we see in humans across cultures, across history. It's how we've gone from, banging rocks together to building rockets.
That's pretty impressive when you put it that way. Okay, so we've got this ability to learn from examples. We've got this ability to combine what we've learned. But something tells me there's more to this story, right? What's the third pillar of educability?
The third pillar is where things get really, really interesting. Valiant calls it acquiring knowledge through instruction. And this, my friend, is where language comes in and just blows the whole thing wide open.
Okay, I was wondering when language was going to make its grand entrance. We've been talking about learning from experience, but we humans, we don't just learn by doing right. We learn by talking to each other, by reading books, by watching YouTube tutorials. Wait, is that just me?
No, you're onto something important. Language allows us to do something truly remarkable, which is to share our knowledge, our experiences, our beliefs with each other, even across vast distances of time and space.
So instead of each of us having to, reinvent the wheel or the cake recipe, we can benefit from the accumulated wisdom of, everyone who's ever lived.
Exactly. Think about it. You want to learn how to play the guitar. Do you have to spend years trying to figure it out on your own through trial and error? No. You can pick up a book, watch a video, find a teacher, and boom, you've got access to centuries of accumulated knowledge about music theory, guitar technique, you name it.
It's like fast-tracking our education. Language is like this incredible cheat code for learning.
And it's not just about practical skills, right? Think about all the complex ideas, the stories, the values, the beliefs that are passed down through language. Our understanding of history, our sense of morality, our hopes for the future. It's all shaped by the language we inherit and the stories we tell each other.
So language is more than just a tool for communication. It's like the operating system for human culture itself. It's how we make sense of the world, how we connect with each other, how we build societies.
And that brings us to one of the most fascinating aspects of human educability, the fact that we're not just learning machines, we're also believing machines.
Okay, so we're learning, we're combining knowledge, we're sharing it with each other, using this incredible tool of language. But then we have to decide what to do with all that information, right? What to accept, what to reject, what to believe.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. Because as humans, we don't just process information in this cold, logical, objective way. Our beliefs are shaped by our emotions, by our experiences, by our cultural backgrounds, by all sorts of things.
So how do we make sense of this whole messy, beautiful, often contradictory world of human belief? How does Valiant explain how we navigate this?
And that's where Valiant introduces this idea of robust logic, this idea that our brains aren't these perfectly rational, logical machines. We can hold conflicting beliefs. We can make decisions based on incomplete information. We can even be totally convinced of something that turns out to be completely wrong.
Well, that sounds reassuring. I mean, imagine if we just short-circuited it every time we encountered a paradox or a contradiction, never getting anything done.
Exactly. This flexibility, this ability to hold multiple perspectives, to tolerate a little bit of inconsistency, it's actually a huge advantage. It allows us to be creative, to adapt to new situations, and to keep learning and growing throughout our lives.
Okay, so we're learning, we're combining knowledge, we're sharing it through language, and we're doing it all with this kind of robust logic that allows for flexibility and even a little bit of creative contradiction. But how does it all come together? Where does all this processing happen? Valiant uses this really interesting concept called the mind's eye.
The mind's eye, it's one of those concepts that's both familiar and kind of mysterious, right? Like we all have this sense of seeing things in our minds, of picturing things. But Valiant takes it a step further. He's not just talking about visual imagery, he's talking about this mental space where we create a representation of the world around us, a space where we can manipulate information, make connections, and apply our knowledge to new situations.
So it's like a mental playground where we can take all these different pieces of information, facts, experiences, beliefs, and start putting them together in new and interesting ways.
Exactly. It's where the magic of what Valiant calls integrative learning happens.
Integrative learning is that like when I'm trying to remember where I parked my car and I'm like, okay, I know it was near that big tree and it was definitely on the left side of the street. And wait, was that the day I was wearing my lucky socks?
That's a great example. Your mind's eye is pulling together all sorts of previously learned information, your memory of the parking lot, your understanding of spatial relationships, maybe even some totally random associations, like your lucky socks, to help you solve this problem. It's seamlessly integrating all that information to guide your actions.
And presumably it helps me find my car eventually.
Yeah.
But on a more serious note, are there examples of this kind of integrative learning in other species? Or is this something that's unique to humans?
That's a great question. And while humans are definitely masters of integrative learning, there's evidence that other animals are capable of it too, to varying degrees. Valiant talks about these amazing crows that figured out how to drop stones into a container to raise the water level and reach a tasty treat. They're not just mimicking a behavior they've seen, they're combining different pieces of knowledge, like the fact that objects displace water and that adding more objects means displacing more water to achieve a goal.
Wow, that's incredible. Crows using tools, solving problems, and presumably sharing their knowledge with other crows. It makes you wonder just how widespread this capacity for integrative learning really is in the animal kingdom. But getting back to us humans, this whole idea of educability seems incredibly powerful. But there's also a flip side to it, isn't there? I mean, we're talking about this ability to learn and adapt, but what happens when we learn the wrong things or when our beliefs lead us astray?
That's exactly right. It's like this double-edged sword. We have this amazing capacity for learning and believing, but we have to be careful about what we choose to believe because not all beliefs are created equal, right?
It's like that saying, it's not what you don't know that gets you into trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so. We humans, we have this incredible ability to convince ourselves of things, even when they're not true.
And with the internet and social media, it's easier than ever to get caught up in these echo chambers where we're only exposed to information that confirms what we already believe, even if those beliefs are based on misinformation or outright lies.
It's like we're all susceptible to this kind of confirmation bias where we tend to seek out and interpret information in a way that reinforces our existing beliefs, even when they're wrong. So how do we avoid falling into these traps? How do we make sure we're using our amazing capacity for educability for good and not for, spreading conspiracy theories or perpetuating harmful stereotypes?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And there's no easy answer. But I think one important step is simply being aware of our own biases, recognizing that we all have them.
Right, and being willing to question our beliefs, to be open to the possibility that we might be wrong, even about things we feel really strongly about.
Exactly. And that's where things like critical thinking skills come in. Being able to evaluate information, to assess the credibility of sources, to identify logical fallacies. These are all essential skills for navigating this complex information landscape.
And those skills are more important than ever, especially now when we're constantly bombarded with information from all sides.
Absolutely. It's not enough to just be able to consume information. We need to be able to think critically about that information, to discern truth from falsehood, to separate fact from opinion. And that takes practice. It's a skill that we have to cultivate throughout our lives.
So it's not just about being smart, it's about being wise.
Exactly. And I think that's what Valiant is really getting at in his book. Educability isn't just about accumulating knowledge, it's about using that knowledge wisely, ethically, and with a deep understanding of the human condition.
This deep dive into the importance of being educable has been incredible.
Yeah.
It's given us a lot to think about, that's for sure.
It certainly has.
It's clear that this concept of educability has profound implications for, well, pretty much everything. But I think the most important takeaway is this. We have this remarkable capacity for learning and growth, and it's up to us to use it wisely. If we can do that, then I think we have a real shot at creating a future that's not only more technologically advanced, but also more just, more equitable, and more fulfilling for everyone.
I completely agree.
Well, that's a wrap on this episode, Deep Divers. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those learning caps on.